Hello everybody and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Hujuana and today we're looking at the most common ways sci-fi ground vehicles get around. Wheels, tracks, hovering and legs, and the pros and cons of each. For example, wheels are more comfortable and fuel efficient than tracks are, but are worse on rough terrain, that sort of thing. Since I just mentioned it, let's start with off-road capability. Clearly, tracks are going to be good at that because that's what they're meant to do due to their large contact area. Wheeled vehicles can absolutely also go off-road, but they're also a lot faster and more efficient on roads, and they may be able to modify their contact area to optimize between the two options with tire pressure systems. For the more sci-fi side of things, hovering obviously can just go completely over rough ground, though how rough depends on how high they can hover. There's also the question of if they can cross water, which depends on the tech of the setting. Walkers and mechs are a similar deal, but they may also concentrate the weight of the vehicle into a smaller area, leading to them possibly sinking into the ground and getting stuck. Plus, they're at risk from trips and falls in a way that other vehicles aren't. Not to say that other vehicles can't fall over. Part of how well a vehicle functions off-road is its suspension system. Legs and tires combine suspension and mobility in the same thing since they flex, but they can also be paired with actual suspension mechanisms to fully absorb shocks and level out a vehicle. Hovering vehicles don't need suspension at all, though it depends how you think of it since the hovering system is the suspension. Plus, it's very easy to change their ride height, something which applies to legs too, to some degree. Tracked and wheeled vehicles can also do that even in real life thanks to hydro-pneumatic suspension, which can also be used to set the ride height per wheel. That allows the entire vehicle to tilt forward or backward, or even side to side. This tech allows for very cool tanks like the Swedish STRV-103 to exist, which relied on hull aiming to point its completely fixed gun. Up and down was done by that suspension, and its short square wheelbase let it turn on the spot very easily. The thing is, while active suspension like this is a very cool feature, it's also an expensive and complicated one compared to other options like torsion bars. That's why it's generally only used by nations with lots of mountains, where it makes gun laying a lot easier on steep terrain. Of course, other sci-fi tech works really well in this sort of environment too, particularly legs, though mechs would need to have their guns mounted on top to truly fit such hilly terrain. And that's because they need to see over ridges and other obstacles, which is going to be easier on a legged vehicle since it's probably going to be tall, but then it's also a lot more likely to be seen in other places where there's no convenient tall objects to hide behind. It's also a lot more difficult to go hull down and peek over the crest of a hill on a mech or walker, though it does depend on the terrain. To be fair though, something taller can just sit further back from the hill for example, though that may expose it from other angles. Being exposed is just one of the many vulnerabilities that legs introduce. Getting a mobility kill on a mech or walker might take it completely out of action if it falls over, whereas something using the other mobility options would still be able to shoot even if they couldn't move. This does depend on how many legs there are on the walking vehicle though. A related issue is what happens when losing power, which is just something that can happen in combat. Maybe the power plant gets hit. Maybe it's been ages since resupply and fuel runs out. Maybe there's an EMP. Maybe it just gets abandoned by the crew. When these occur, the vehicle needs to be recovered, which is easy enough with wheels and tracks since they're on the ground already and can be towed. Recovering a grounded hovering vehicle is a bit more difficult, and legs are the worst of all. Imagine trying to recover a fallen over mobile suit. Another related issue which stems from combat damage is redundancy. With wheels, it is possible to lose some and keep rolling, depending on how many you have. Like it might be hard to keep going if your bike loses a wheel. There's also the potential of run-flat tires, or even using completely airless designs where punctures can't happen at all, and for all of these, it is fairly easy to swap them out if they're damaged. With tracks, it's a bit harder if some links are broken. A damaged or thrown track brings a tank to a complete halt, requiring a good bit of attention to get it moving again. Though it is possible to do fun temporary things like short tracking. It's a bit difficult to do something like that with legs, though at least with those, if there's lots of them, they're sort of redundant. As for hovering, well, that really depends more on the specifics of the tech. If there's lots of small anti-gravity elements, then it can take a few hits. pivoting back to capabilities now with speed. There's a lot of variation between the methods, but it does depend a lot on the terrain. Hovering goes over the top of it, so it's probably the fastest option, with wheels in second place, at least on hard ground. As for the last two, well, tracked vehicles can go a lot faster than you probably realise, and over rougher ground they can outpace wheels pretty well. Legs can run, but honestly I don't see them outpacing tracks because running would put a lot of stress onto the leg mechanisms. But hey, if you're in magical mech lands, then stuff like that doesn't really matter, especially when you get up to really big legs that can make big steps. But all of that is for straight line speed. Agility and turning is also important here, and I've already talked about how hovering might encounter difficulties with sliding around in previous videos, but at least they can slide sideways and spin around on the spot. Tracks can rotate on the spot too, something which most wheeled vehicles can't. Off the top of my head, it's only really the AMX-10RC that can due to its relatively short wheelbase, but at least it shows that it's possible. Plus, with things like Omni wheels or ones on special pivots or that are ball-shaped, wheels can potentially reach similar agility as hovering vehicles. As for legs, well, we all know how well legs work and how good they are at turning around. But not every vehicle shape will work well for that. Like, I don't imagine the Strand Beast thing in The Last Jedi is the most agile of things, for example. The last practical matter I want to cover is sound. Metal tracks are kinda unavoidably loud, squeaky things. That's just the nature of metal rubbing on metal. Wheels do have running noise, but are an awful lot quieter, and hovering depends on the tech. And legs are going to have footsteps, scaling depending on the size of the vehicle, and being especially noticeable when transmitted through the ground. And now onto more ephemeral matters like vibe. All four can make for fine choices in fiction, but legs and hovering say something about the setting and the feeling it's going for that tracks and wheels don't. But sometimes the difference can be misused, like in Warhammer 40k with the Primaris Repulsor and Impulsor, which I don't think work. Anti-gravity tech used to be this rare and alien thing that was in short supply for the Imperials. Pretty much the only thing that used it was the land speeders, with everything else using tracks, legs, or occasionally wheels. It gave Imperial forces a, forgive the pun, grounded feeling. But now, anti-grav feels like it's kind of everywhere and has lost how different and special it felt, which has also eroded the feel and vibe of the Astartes. But the genie is out of the bottle on this one, so I just have to deal with it, I guess. What do you think about it? Either way, this does make a really great example of how the choice of ground vehicles movement helps with the vibe and feeling of a setting. If something hovers, it automatically feels high-tech and maybe even alien. Legs are sort of similar given we have basically no real-life walking vehicles. It's limited to like extremely niche logging equipment, so seeing a walking tank naturally lends a sense of unreality to a setting. Tracks and wheels are very much all over the place in real life, and so seeing them in fiction feels closer to reality. All this makes for a decent rule of thumb, but like anything, there are of course exceptions. That means any of these can work just fine in fiction. Yeah, maybe there are story needs or a desire for a setting to feel a certain way, or perhaps a set piece hinges on using a particular method, but any of these options can make for an iconic vehicle. You can support Spacedock by joining our Patreon, where you can get our frigate and spacefighter design reference books. Alternatively, you can support us directly through YouTube by becoming a channel member. Thanks to our supporters, and thank you for watching.